She shot a lot of material during the making of the film, and I think their marriage was in a difficult spot, to say the least. And so it was so painful for her. She just sat on that material for, I think, 20 years and then gave it to, I forget who made the film, but they used it as the basis, as the foundation for Hearts of Darkness. But she didn't, I don't think, she might be the executive producer. She's not really the director of the film. No. But it's an amazing piece.
P.S. Francis Ford Coppola was a big porn fan and used to attend all the AVN award ceremonies.
Really?
Yep.
Is that true? That's bizarre.
Absolutely.
Were they in the West Coast?
Yeah, West Coast.
Oh, it makes sense,
LA.
right? Because most of their shooting was...
Yeah, no, he would have a ringside table and was quite open about it.
Yeah, there are definitely some scenes or discussions in the film about his libido.
Oh yeah, as a young.
Uh-huh.
I'm gonna ask.
All right. Well, let me just officially, even though we've started, but let me officially introduce and welcome you guys. It's a pleasure to welcome Michelle Maren, right? The subject of an autobiography of Michelle Maren. What are the odds of that? And then filmmaker Michel Negroponte, who I've been actually wanting on the podcast for a long time.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me and Michelle Maren.
I'm very happy to be here. Thank you, Adam.
We all met at a screening of One Cut, One Life, like 2 months ago, maybe, if that long ago, maybe a month and a half ago, something like that.
2 months is fair, I think.
Yeah, being conservative. Lucius Mall and Ed Pincus's film. And if dressing Michelle, well, I'll say Michelle, just so people understand that's not Michelle.
Actually, we're both Michelle.
Okay. All right, well, screw that. I think people will know who I'm addressing by the answers. And that film, by the way, just as a point, I was going to say that if I address some, don't worry, I haven't forgotten about the other person. That's all I was going to say. But that film in particular was a good place because there was a panel afterwards. You were on it because you, of course, I wouldn't say you were a student of Ed Pincus, right? Who collaborated with Lucia on that film. Do you want to say something about that period of time too? Because I'm curious.
Well, that period of time is the 70s, and I was a student of Ed Pincus and Ricky Leacock at the MIT film section. And, well, the importance of it, I think, and I'm going to try to be brief, is that Ed Pincus had a profound impact on my life as a filmmaker. He was incredibly bold. He made personal autobiographical films. And though I make personal films, I don't necessarily make autobiographical films. In this particular case, what happened is that I ended up collaborating with Michelle Maren on making her autobiography. And so certainly aspects of Ed Pincus's life and his thinking contributed to the making of this film.
But I also want to say that even though, like in the case of this film, and you have to remind me if you did a voiceover on this film.
There's a little bit of voiceover.
Okay, because I didn't remember for sure. But I mean, like the film, I know one of the films that Michelle Maren, who was definitely very moved by, and in fact inspired her to reach out to you, was Jupiter's Wife, right? And that film, you do a lot of narration. So even though it might be about this woman, Maggie, it really is also really about you too, because your voice is all over. You're all over it, and then your relationship with her is central to the film, as it is again in this film, I would say, right?
Well, I mean, I think I'm a little more transparent in this film, but it just worked out differently.
Yes.
Can I just say something about the voiceover?
Oh, yeah.
Because that was an element of Jupiter's Wife that I was so attracted to. And in fact, Michelle, I don't know if you remember this, but in the very beginning, you did start out doing voiceover for our film. And I liked it because it reminded me of Jupiter's Wife.
Right.
And I remember one of the things you said, he described first meeting me, and he said that I looked like a movie star.
Which I can verify.
And I said to him, that is the most spectacular voiceover I've ever heard. We must keep it in. And then, Michelle, you decided to go in a different direction and to call it an autobiography, and the voiceover was removed for most of the film, and so it took a different direction and actually became kind of different than Jupiter's Wife. And I mean, there are some similarities, but I think it has its own personality, its own character. So even though I was sad to see the comment about me looking like a movie star go, in the end, I could see how it's a better film now.
Yeah, well, that's good. But the part of your looking like her, a movie star, doesn't go away.
Oh,
right.
Well,
There's
isn't that nice?
Okay.
Thank you, Adam.
Since it's come up already in a couple of different ways, one thing is we already mentioned that you had seen Jupiter's Wife. We know the backstory from an autobiography of Michelle Maren, because it's at the beginning that you would say as much, that you knew you were familiar with Michel Negroponte's work and you reached out to him to collaborate. What's your version of that?
My version is I was watching PBS and Jupiter's Wife came on. I'm a big fan of documentary films anyway. I love to see inside real people's lives. And this film came on POV or Independent Lens or something. And I was so moved by it, not just by Maggie, who is captivating, but by the way her story was told. It was told in such a beautiful, almost lyrical way. It was so poetic, and it was filmed very simply but very beautifully. And I was just mesmerized, and it was the kind of film that I said to myself, I have to see this again. So I immediately bought the VHS, which shows you how long ago it was. I bought the VHS, and I watched it over and over and over again until I think I wore the thing out. And when it finally came out on DVD, which I waited so many years, it finally came out on DVD. I got the DVD. I donated the VHS, and other people enjoyed it. I even showed the film to other people.
You did screenings?
Yes, I did.
You hosted screenings?
I did Jupiter's Wife screenings. I did.
Did you ever think to invite Michelle to any of them?
No, at that point, I didn't have those sort of thoughts. Actually, I was attending Mount Carmel Guild. It's a day program for people with mental illness, and I brought the film in and showed it to all of Mount Carmel Guild, and both the staff and the clients loved it. So fast forward, this was, in the mid-90s, 96, 7, I saw it on television. I watched it over and over and over again. Fast forward many, many years, 2008.
Yeah, that's over 12 years.
You're better at math.
I don't know, it's
very impressive.
Well, 10 years. Not so, maybe not so great after all.
And I was sitting at my computer, not doing much, and it hit me, I call it divine inspiration, to contact this man, this guy, Michel Negroponte, and I Googled his name, contact or something, an email came up. I didn't even go to the site. I just took it right off the Google list.
The search
I
results
emailed him, and I it's funny because I typed out this idea of what our film could possibly be, and
so in that initial email you pitched.
It was a pitch. It was a pitch. Yeah.
No.
It was a pitch. It was a divinely inspired pitch.
I was going to say, because back when you originally started, when you fell in love with the film and you started to really become caught up with it, that there probably wasn't any easy internet. I mean, it was still a very young thing. right? So that wasn't the.
And
maybe it wouldn't have occurred to somebody then.
I am not adept at the computer, so just the fact that I could find him, in a second.
Well, this was once 2008. By then, I guess people thought, "Oh, well, I could just Google it." But that's my point, because I would say divine inspiration after a 10-year period is it's a little oxymoron. You know what I mean?
No, it's not oxymoronic because
Mm-hmm.
timing is everything.
That's true.
Timing is everything.
Uh-huh.
And it's funny because the pitch I made was what happens to old porn stars. Basically, that was my idea. What happens to old strippers and old go-go dancers and old porn stars and escorts, streetwalkers? What do you do?
Sex industry workers.
Yeah, what do you do when you're no longer a body? When you're no longer marketable? Where do you go? What do you do with your life when you have no other skills but selling your body? So that was my original idea, and of course the film went in a totally different direction, but it doesn't matter because
that's his job.
Within a couple of days I got a response, and I didn't even worry about it. And I am a chronic worrier. And I didn't worry about it. I just clicked send and went about my business. A couple of days later, Michel answered me back. I wasn't even through the roof because I was expecting him. Of course he's going to. I was divinely inspired. Of course he's going to write me back. Why did it take 2 whole days?
I think it's funny because when I first met Maggie in Central Park, I was sitting on a park bench and I had started a project about Central Park. Wasn't quite sure where it was going. And I saw Maggie walk by with 5 dogs. She went into the ladies' room with all 5 dogs. I sort of waited outside. I just couldn't believe it. There were some French tourists standing outside laughing because they just found the whole scene so funny. And then when Maggie walked out, I introduced myself and she looked at me and she said, "Well, I've been expecting you." Those were exactly her words. So I did get an email from Michelle Maren. And it was a pitch. I think that's a perfect way of describing it. I'd never really thought of it that way, but clearly that's what it was. And we had lunch a week or 2 weeks later. Her memory is perfect. Mine is vague.
2 weeks at the Hard Rock Cafe.
2 weeks later at the Hard Rock Cafe, someplace close to Port Authority bus station because you came in by bus. And the pitch, and between the pitch and the lunch, she was very, very effective. And I said, let's try to do this. Let's work on this project together and see where it goes. I was finishing a film, I'm Dangerous with Love, at that point, and doing post-production, very busy. So it was a couple of months later. We discussed the project quite a bit. Via email, on the phone, and even in person. And there were a couple of things that happened, and Michelle Maren suggested that I give her a movie camera, which was something at the time I think I was also contemplating. It's not anything I'd ever done. Hand out a movie camera and say, "Here, you start the project, and let's see what happens." But that's really what transpired. And I'd say once a month for the next 6 or 7 months, Michelle would come to my cutting room and show me what she'd been filming. And I was blown away by it. I just thought the material was so unusual. It was so beautifully photographed. It was lit impeccably. I could tell that Michelle had sort of carefully chosen, a wardrobe for particular scenes, was almost going back in time and reliving certain events in her life as she was telling these stories. There are many of them, not all of them, but many of them are monologues to camera, and they have. I'd seen theatrical monologues years ago on stage. There were a couple of playwrights that I particularly admired. And I thought these were of the same caliber, just so beautifully done in terms of how it's kind of they're acted out, some of them. And I think that's where this project started.
You mentioned Michelle Maren. You mentioned the timing being something. So that's why you were able to go with the flow and be open to the experience. And it almost sounds like, without getting too, I don't know, zen about it, but Michelle also, it sounds like, for whatever reason, handing over a camera, I should say, allowing this to kind of go in this organic way that may have been atypical for your style of filmmaking from the past. I don't know. That you were both kind of open at that particular moment. That's maybe why, part of the reason why, anyway, this thing took at the time, you know.
Well, it's interesting because when I suggested the camera, I had seen something, a show from cable television, a reality show actually, that part of it was a woman doing a bedside video diary. And when I saw that, I thought, maybe I could do, and I just thought of it as a bedside diary. That's how I started out doing it. But once I got that little camera, the creative juices started flowing, and I wanted to do more than just a bedside chat. And so...
You mean like a confessional? You wanted to do something a bit more cinematic almost, it sounds like.
Well, I'm a huge fan of classic films.
Mm-hmm.
And... having watched
Barbara Stanwyck.
Oh, Barbara.
I don't know.
Barbara Stanwyck. Katharine Hepburn, Betty Davis, Joan Crawford, Marilyn Monroe, Judy Garland. I mean, all of them.
Okay.
And when I got this little camera, I thought maybe I can actually create something. When I originally had the camera, I thought if Michel Negroponte uses 2 seconds of my footage, I'll be thrilled. And then when I started doing more, and I found myself opening up to the camera. Now, I worked in the sex industry for 8 years. Mm-hmm. It's a very hard subject to talk about. In fact, in all the years before I met Michelle, I had never discussed working in the sex industry with any of my therapists, counselors, or psychiatrists.
Really?
I had never discussed the childhood abuse that I had endured.
With your therapists?
Anyone, no. They would bring it up, and I'd say, next subject. I wouldn't discuss it with anyone.
Maybe they sensed, obviously, well, they know the signs of when they're talking to somebody, perhaps. Whether it's the resistance or other things, maybe.
Well, again,
because I can't imagine
timing.
They didn't have a sense that you were avoiding subjects. That's what I'm getting at.
I wasn't ready at that point to discuss it.
Oh, of course, yeah.
But there's something about this project. There's something about having that little camera. There's something about Michelle that just opened me up, and I was able to discuss these most intimate things that I had never discussed with anyone before. It was quite a cathartic.
Right, that's a good word for it.
Process.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned a couple of things in the way you described the experiences, and Michelle also brought up acting. And how much do you feel like? What's your perspective on that? Well, like, how much were you performing, and how much were? And I'm not saying I know it's all comes from authentic experiences. So, but when you turn on the camera, how much of that was performance? Do you have a sense that most of it was, or?
Well, all the world is a stage. And the monologues I did were definitely thought out. I wasn't reading something, but I did give a lot of thought to it, what I wanted to say, what I wanted to convey. I know that the film is only going to be so long. I remember in the beginning when I would give these things to Michel, and he'd say, well, we only have so much time. Can you cut them down a little bit? And I would say, yeah, but I'm not an editor. I can't. So I was conscious of the fact that I was making a film. And I always felt that our film didn't adhere to any rules. So I never felt like I was in some sort of box where I had to do it this way or that way. I just did it the way
you knew how.
I knew how. And like I said, I'm just this fan of classic films, and I always thought I was born in the wrong era, and I should have been in my 20s and the 50s, and I would have been a huge hit. And it was my chance to
explore this side of your.
Yes,
yes. Michelle, you must get because the kinds of films you make, you must get people spontaneously reaching out, emailing you and reaching out to you that are affected by your films, right? Just because of the specific nature. I don't think if you're making films about oil spills and other environmental type of things, maybe that would be the case. But what was this something that just, I don't know, what was it about this email or this initial correspondence that was so different?
Well, first of all, it's not the first time that someone has reached out or suggested that their story might interest me. It's happened, well, I can't say a number of times, but maybe half a dozen or a dozen, I forget. But I'm Dangerous with Love is a film that began with an email from a young man who became one of the characters in the film. So, in a sense, it was an email that arrived that initiated the project I'm Dangerous with Love, which is really about drug users going through a very unusual experimental treatment for detoxing from opiates. I think it's partly timing. It just so happened I was at the end of a film and maybe thinking about what I might do next. And when I get close to to the end of a project, I always start to think, what am I going to do next? The idea that there isn't a project in my life is so terrifying to me that I'm always, when I get to the end of something, I'm always beginning to experiment and try to see what might happen next, because I have to be working on something all the time.
So, yeah, timing, right? It's like any relationship. Two people have to be sort of at the right place in their lives at the right time. So what was the time before you gave her was there... because you do explore some abuse at home growing up, right? Mm-hmm. And other very, very personal things that go on in your life, and you've talked about some of them already. So how did you end up figuring out how this film would be structured, and once you had the footage, how to go about assembling it in a way? Because you edit your films.
Deciding the direction of a film is a slow and painful process, at least for me, because I don't try to impose. I really try to allow the process to sort of direct itself, and I'm very sensitive to the process. So I'll give you an example. There was something about Michelle's relationship with her father that I felt was very, very important. And she even asks me in the film at one point, or she comments on the fact the film seems to be more about my father than my mother. One has limited time and in even a feature-length documentary, and you do have to make choices. So I thought that the relationship with her father was very, very important, and I think we tend to sort of describe that in a more realized way than, for instance, the relationship with your mother. So those are the kinds of choices that get made in the process of making a film and the process of editing a film. By the way, I also cut and shoot as the film evolves. And I start that process almost immediately. So I'm working on the film. It's not that I'm set, but I'm always rough cutting scenes, trying to find places for them, and trying to see where the film is going next. And so it's a process. That's why, in part, I shoot and edit my own work, is that I don't differentiate between the two. I find them part of a single process. So that's something that Michelle and I gradually figured out. And so, for instance, I thought at one point maybe this entire film was going to consist of the material that Michelle Maren was filming. That and nothing else at a certain point early on. And I even thought that I would sort of take myself out of the film altogether, just allow it to be her film, and that I would really be sort of like the ghost writer. But then there was a certain point where something happened, and we started to go out into the world together to sort of look at Michelle Maren's childhood and her teenage years. We traveled, to her apartment. We met with old high school classmates. And so the film takes a shift at that point, and it goes from an autobiographical investigation, Michelle filming herself, which is roughly the first third of the film, to a more typical documentary where I was shooting and she's the subject. And that really is roughly what I call the second third of the film. And the last third of the film, I kind of step into it. And I'm not going to say exactly what happens because I don't want to, reveal everything that transpires in the film. But I do see the film in three parts, and each part is distinctly different.
Well, as you talk about this, I could see how fragile things could start to become, because you definitely, Michelle Maren, came into it wanting to have a director, that you specifically, this particular person. If he hadn't replied, that you didn't have a list of second and third candidates.
No, I
right?
never
so
approached
I got that.
Else.
I sense Doug Block waiting for the phone call. Please let Michelle say no.
Sorry, Doug Block, you were not on my list. Only Michel Negroponte.
And we love Doug Block too. But it could see that as it evolved, and then it became this much more of a collaboration. And then it's not just a collaboration; it's your life. So if he's all of a sudden stepping in to assert himself as the filmmaker, which would seem like the natural thing to do, well, that could be a bit difficult, because now you've got a story you want to tell, and maybe you've already come to some degree of visualization of it in your head, in your mind. And now here's the filmmaker who's got the narrative structure experience coming in, and that could be kind of sticky, right?
Well, I can say this, that the filming, which took, 5 years, Michel?
Wow.
Was very challenging.
Yeah.
And confusing for me, because I've never made a film. I never even picked up a camera before. Michelle had to show me what the viewfinder was. And when I started, as you say, I started out thinking that Michelle would shoot me, and I certainly didn't start out thinking that I would be filming any footage. And then it was, for a brief time, it was going in the direction that maybe Michelle wasn't going to shoot me at all, and I actually didn't like that. And I remember even saying to him, I did email you for a reason, because I want you to shoot me. I don't want the whole film to be my footage.
Right.
I like the way that you filmed Jupiter's Wife, and I want you to film me with your camera. And I remember feeling very panicked that he wasn't going to shoot me at all. And then over these 5 years, the film took many, many twists and turns, and at times I wasn't even sure which direction it was going. And there were so many challenges presented, not only the fact that I was exposing all of my secrets to basically a stranger, Michelle, and the whole world, whereas I had never even told my therapist before. But also, I experienced a lot of loss during the making of this film. I had two parents pass away within 10 months of each other. And
who were estranged, right?
They hadn't seen each other in,
know.
I don't know, 40 years or something. It's just
I'd
coincidence.
say that's estranged. Yeah.
That they died, and they were 12 years apart. My mother was 12 years older than my father,
right.
And yet they died the same year. It's kind of strange, but and my counselor referred to both these deaths as complicated deaths, because there was a lot of unfinished business that they took to their graves. At that point, I couldn't film at all. And I was just emotionally spent. And I think working on a film was sort of not what I was able to do at that time. And I think it was difficult for Michelle because I wasn't doing anything as far as the film. It was difficult for me because I wanted to do something for the film, but emotionally I was just incapable. And it was just complicated on so many levels. At some points, I felt like I wasn't even going to make it through. That particular year, when both my parents died, my main goal was just to stay on the planet. So making a film was no longer my priority.
Understood.
And but we made it through. And now that we have, I can say that I am grateful to Michelle. I'm thankful for the opportunity to have made this film. I think it came out better than I could have imagined. And when I started the project, I was confident that Michelle would treat both me and my story in a very respectful and sensitive way. And
like he did with Maggie's story.
Like with Maggie and Jupiter's Wife, and I think he did just that.
But that was my next question, what you thought of the final product and the final, draft of the film and the final, if you endorsed it, and at least on a personal level.
There are parts of it that I still can't watch.
Is that because it's just too raw?
Too raw. My mother being sick,
Oh yeah, almost forgot about.
Yeah,
there's some very intimate moments there. Sure, but that would be true for anybody, right?
I really just can't watch it at all.
She was so glamorous, right? I mean, took such care of her presentation. Then she's a dying person like everybody else.
She was like Gina Lollobrigida. I mean, she was gorgeous.
Yeah.
And always very fastidious about her appearance. And
do you think you take that on because you're fastidious too?
Probably, yes.
Feel free to jump in, Michelle. And I mean that as a compliment.
Thank you.
But you could say that I can't watch it, but I'm glad that people are seeing this because it's real life, and this could be healing for people too. And it's important for people to see this stuff. If we didn't have this, I mean, there would be no kind of, I don't know, there'd be only other types of films.
Well,
there wouldn't be this type of film, which there needs to be.
The people who have seen it, I've gotten such positive, wonderful feedback from. We did a screening in Boston, a sneak peek screening, and people came up to me afterwards, opening themselves up, telling me the most intimate details of their lives after they saw the film. One man told me about his alcoholism. Another man told me about he had this spiritual awakening one time, and just very, very personal things. And I was so touched by that. One man specifically came to the screening because he had read on the website that was promoting it that the film was about second chances. And he had printed out that page, and he showed it to me. And he had highlighted second chances, and he showed it to me. And he said, look, this is why I came, because I wanted to hear that I have a second chance.
It's beautiful. Yeah, it's very moving. Well, just get ready for it. I mean, obviously, this will be an ongoing thing. And so we can say that it's going to have its world premiere at Doc NYC this fall in November of 2015.
Making films which are as up close and personal as this is mind-boggling. I'm even trying to think back over the last 5 years where, when we worked on this film together, shooting it, cutting it. It's an extraordinary experience. And I think, for Michelle Maren to have agreed to do something like this and tell her story in such an up-close and personal way is really, really brave. I think, at the same time, when you make a film, first of all, you can't anticipate. Obviously, this is about real life, the things that are going to happen. For instance, that her mother and father died during the course of making this film. which had an impact, obviously, on the direction of the movie. It had an impact on Michelle Maren's psyche and her heart and her soul. So it clearly resonates, in the film. It also had a big impact on me. And it's tough, it's tough to sort of look at something as critically and as intimately as this and try to sort of shape this material into a story that people can understand and appreciate. Anyway, I think it's a process. I've done this a number of times. I'm an experienced, seasoned filmmaker, but I get to the end of each of these projects and I go, holy cow, how did that all happen? There's an aspect to it that is still a mystery to me.
Wow. I mean, could it be that you're on some sort of, during the process of it, that you're on some sort of, what we do in times of trauma, it's a strong word, I grant you, but when we're dealing with the throes of a lot of drama, we tend to go on some something kicks in, is my point, which protects us and gets us through to the other end of it. I mean, whatever scale we're talking about, maybe I think that's part of it, and you're relying on your instincts a lot more, and then you get to the end, it's like, and your recovering mode, your
survival mode.
It is survival mode. It is a survival mode, but it's also, and then you get to sort of this end of it, and you're like, how did I do that? Because you're out of survival mode.
Well, it's like running a 26-mile marathon and then collapsing
right.
at the end.
Yeah. Yeah.
My role in the making of this film was that in order to make it as authentic and intimate as Michelle Maren envisioned it, I had to go inside her head in the cutting room. And I was looking at this material, spending hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours, sort of entering into someone's psyche. And I don't think I was always aware of that because I had to step back and, edit the movie. But there were times where I was so deeply affected by the material. I mean, I honestly, lay down on the floor of my editing room several times and just curled into a fetal position and just went, holy moly. I mean, this is just so intense. Anyway, I'm very happy we both got through this film and that it's going out into the world. It was difficult. The collaboration at times was rocky. Collaborations are difficult. I think we both had, for certain aspects of the film, we had our own vision of where it might go, and we were not always in sync. But, we did it, and I think it's a good film.
Well, thank you both for doing this, and I can't wait for audience. I've seen the film, so I'm not going to say I can't wait to see the film, but I'm really looking forward to seeing people's responses. I plan to be at your Q&A. When you see a movie as intense as this movie, and many that aren't quite as intense, you need time to kind of absorb it and marinate and digest it, and to go right into the fact that you think an audience is going to be able to come up with some sort of a question that, it just seems like you need a drink. Come back. Let's talk about it. But, that's not why people spend the extra $10 for their ticket. They want the Q&A. But anyway, so we'll be at Doc NYC, and then hopefully maybe even we're recording this a few months ahead. Michelle, thank you for inviting us.
Well, thank you for inviting both of us. Thank you for coming to my apartment. I hope it looks familiar.
Which is
to you.
all we'll say is it's somewhere which is somewhere west of the Hudson. That's all we'll tell people.
That's all you're going to get out of us.
Or we can even be more specific. We'll say west of the Hudson, east of the Mississippi.
Okay.
You're not getting anything more out of us. Thank you. Yeah, thanks very much.
Thank you, Adam. And thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Adam.